The night was alive with tension. Alyssa could feel it in the air, the chill, the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling as she sprinted through the dense forest. The trees loomed like dark giants, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers, trying to grab her, to pull her back into the nightmare she was running from. The mist swirling at her feet only made it worse, thick and suffocating, curling around her ankles like a ghost trying to pull her into its embrace. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting, as though the earth was holding its breath with her. Every step she took seemed to echo louder in the stillness of the night, her feet sinking into the damp earth, her lungs burning as she pushed forward. She could hear them, the footsteps behind her, heavy and relentless, a growl in the distance, sharp like a warning. They were getting closer, the pack closing in on her, hunting her down, their rage and bloodlust palpable, and she couldn't outrun them. She knew that. But she had to keep moving, had to keep fighting. Her heart hammered in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the pounding of her feet against the ground. Her body screamed for rest, but there was no time for that, no time for weakness, not when she was so close to the edge, to the danger that had been chasing her for so long. The pack she had once called family, her own flesh and blood, had turned on her, rejected her, cast her aside like she was nothing, and now they were coming for her, coming to finish what they started. Alyssa's breath hitched as she stumbled, her bloodied hand grasping at the trunk of a massive tree for support. She was almost there, almost out of the woods, almost free. But the forest was a maze, and she was lost, trapped in it like prey in a hunter's snare. She couldn't see them, but she could hear them, their footsteps growing louder, more frantic. The growls, deep and guttural, filled the air, vibrating through her bones. They were getting closer. A surge of panic shot through her chest, a raw, unfiltered fear that threatened to choke her. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her sides, the power inside her flaring, begging for release. The forbidden power, the one they had tried to suppress, the one she couldn't control. It was like fire, wild and untamed, coursing through her veins. Her fingers tingled with the energy, the silver flame she'd been hiding for so long. She could feel it, feel the raw strength waiting to burst free. But she couldn't, not yet. Not with them so close. Her heart raced faster as the sound of the pack grew louder. One wrong move, and they would have her. A flash of movement caught her eye. She froze. There, through the trees, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, powerful, imposing. His presence filled the space around him, as though the forest itself bent to his will. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was. She had known deep down that he would find her eventually. Zane, the alpha, the one who had broken her heart all those years ago, the one who had rejected her, left her to fend for herself, the one who had chosen his pack over her, over them. And now, here he was, standing in front of her like some dark shadow come to claim what was his. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them crackled with the unspoken words. The history they shared. Zane's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Alyssa felt everything she had buried deep inside, come rushing back. The longing, the pain, the desire. The man who had once meant everything to her now stood in front of her, a stranger with the same haunting eyes. "Get behind me," Zane's voice growled, low and commanding. It held no softness, no warmth. It was the voice of an alpha, of a leader, of a man who had seen too much, who had buried too many secrets to care about anything other than survival. Alyssa's throat tightened. She didn't want his help, not now, not after everything. Not after the way he had turned his back on her when she needed him most. But as his eyes held hers, there was something that flickered in them. A brief moment of hesitation, of guilt, before it was gone. She shook her head, her chest tightening with a rush of emotion she couldn't name. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like lead in her mouth, heavy and raw. "You left me." Zane's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening, and for a brief moment Alyssa thought he might lash out at her. But instead he stepped closer, moving like a predator, slow and calculated. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice softer now but no less intense. "I never stopped. I never forgot." Alyssa's breath hitched. Her mind raced, but her body betrayed her. There was no denying the pull, the gravity that pulled her in, even after everything. She hated him for what he had done, for leaving her alone to face a world that didn't understand her. But there was no denying the fact that a part of her still wanted him. Wanted the man who had once cared for her, who had once been hers. But that man was gone. Or at least, that's what she had convinced herself. "You didn't care then," she spat, the words coming out sharp. "You never cared. You just left. You chose them over me." Zane's face hardened, his expression unreadable, but she could see the conflict in his eyes. The regret, the pain. But it was too late for that now. He had made his choice, and Alyssa had made hers. She had learned to survive without him, to stand on her own 2 feet. "I'm not your savior, Alyssa," Zane said, his voice rough, "but I'm not going to let them take you. Not while I'm still breathing." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. His eyes, they weren't just full of regret. They were full of something else, something deeper, something she didn't want to acknowledge, something she was too scared to name. But before she could respond, before she could voice the whirlwind of emotions spinning inside her, a low growl interrupted them. The pack. They were here. They had found them. Zane's eyes narrowed, his stance shifting into one of undeniable power. His aura, his presence, radiated like a force of nature, and Alyssa couldn't help but feel the weight of it, the strength of it, the pull of it. He was still the alpha, the leader, the man who could command armies with just a glance. She could feel it, the connection between them, raw and undeniable. But that didn't change anything. She wasn't the same girl she had been all those years ago, and she didn't need him, not anymore. But despite everything, despite the walls she had built around herself, despite the bitterness that still lingered in her heart, part of her still wished he had chosen her, chosen them. But it was too late for that now. With a fierce, determined look, Zane turned to face the pack. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice unwavering. And Alyssa, for the first time in years, found herself doing exactly that. The pack was closing in, their growls echoing louder, more frantic, as if they could sense the weakness in her, the crack in her resolve. Alyssa's heart thudded in her chest, the rapid pulse a reminder of how close she was to being caught. The sound of footsteps grew louder, the thrum of 100 paws on the forest floor shaking the earth beneath her. She could feel them, almost taste the danger in the air, sharp, heavy, suffocating. They were coming, hunting her, ready to tear her apart like they had promised so many years ago. Alyssa's hands trembled, her fingers still glowing with that forbidden power. It flared inside her, rising with a violence that scared her, burned her from the inside out. The silver flame, raw and untamed, it screamed to be released, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she was sure she had no other choice. She wasn't ready. She wasn't. And then, out of nowhere, the sound of footsteps stopped. The growls paused. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. Alyssa froze, her body stiffening as the air shifted, as if the very atmosphere had been altered by the weight of an incoming presence. She wasn't alone anymore. There was a figure in the trees ahead of her, a shadow in the darkness. Tall, broad, his silhouette cutting through the mist like a force of nature. And in that moment, time itself seemed to slow. Every instinct Alyssa had screamed for her to run. Every part of her wanted to bolt, to escape, but she couldn't. Her feet refused to move. The figure stepped forward, and Alyssa's heart stopped. She recognized him immediately, even through the haze of fear and confusion. His posture was commanding, like the forest itself bent to his will. His presence, God, his presence was suffocating, like he had always been the ruler of this land, the master of the night. Zane, the Alpha, the man who had shattered her heart years ago, the man who had chosen his pack, his duties, over her. The man who had walked away without a second glance, leaving her to fend for herself. And now, here he was, stepping into the darkness, as if he had always belonged there. Alyssa's chest tightened, the air thick with the emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Anger, pain, longing, and something else, something she refused to acknowledge, something deeper. But she couldn't. She wouldn't give in. Not now. Not when everything she had fought for was on the line. He stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locking onto hers. She felt the weight of them, like they could see straight through her, to every scar, every wound she had kept hidden. She wanted to look away, to turn her back, to pretend he wasn't here, but she couldn't. It was as if his gaze held her captive, and no matter how hard she tried to break free, she couldn't. Zane's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "Alyssa," he said. And the way he said her name, it was like a wave crashing over her, pulling her under. She hated how it made her feel like no time had passed at all. She hated how his voice still had that effect on her, the effect it always had. "Zane," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely a sound above the wind. She wanted to shout at him, to demand answers, to ask him why he was here, why he had come back after everything. But she couldn't. The words stuck in her throat, tangled in the mess of emotions she couldn't untangle. His eyes softened, but only for a moment before they darkened again with that same intensity. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers, and Alyssa instinctively took a step back. "I should have never left you," he said, his voice barely audible, as if the words themselves pained him to speak. "I've been watching you. All this time, I've been watching you." Alyssa flinched. The words hit her harder than she expected, the weight of them settling like a stone in her chest. She wanted to scream at him, tell him he had no right to be here, to act like he cared. But she didn't. Instead, she held her ground, the anger and hurt building inside her, a fire that threatened to consume her. "You've been watching me?" she asked, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "For what? To see how I've suffered? To see what your abandonment did to me?" Zane's jaw clenched, his muscles tightening under the strain of her words. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time since he had appeared, Alyssa saw something real flit across his face. Regret, guilt. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible. But it was there. "I never wanted to hurt you," he finally said, the words coming out almost like a confession. "I thought I was doing what was best, but I was wrong." Alyssa's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let him in, to let him make it right, to make sense of the years of pain and heartache he had caused her. But she couldn't. Not after everything. Not after he had chosen his pack over her, over them. "You don't get to decide what's best for me anymore." "Zane," she said, her voice firm, though it quivered with the weight of everything she was holding back. "You lost that right the moment you walked away." Zane took another step forward, his hand outstretched, as if he were reaching for her, as if he could somehow make it right with a single touch. But Alyssa recoiled, her body instinctively pulling away. She couldn't let him close. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. "You don't understand," Zane said, his voice rising with a hint of desperation. "I was trying to protect you, to keep you safe from what's coming." Alyssa's brow furrowed. What's coming? What the hell are you talking about? Before Zane could answer, the growls of the pack returned, louder this time, angrier. The trees rustled, the ground shaking beneath their feet. They were closing in, the danger tangible, the threat undeniable. Alyssa felt it, the cold grip of fear clutching at her heart. Zane turned his head, his eyes scanning the darkness. His entire body went rigid, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring, ready to snap. "They're not here for you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They're here for both of us." Alyssa's mind raced. What did he mean? They were coming for her, she knew that much. But Zane was different. His pack wouldn't attack him. Would they? Before she could ask, Zane's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with a grip that was both firm and gentle. She tried to pull away, but his hold was unyielding. His touch sent a jolt of energy through her, and for a moment her mind went blank, her breath caught in her throat. It was the same connection she had felt all those years ago, the one that never went away, no matter how much she tried to bury it. "Stay close to me," Zane said, his voice tight with command. "I won't let them hurt you, not again." Her heart pounded in her chest as the air around them grew heavier, thicker. The tension between them almost unbearable. Part of her wanted to fight him, to push him away and run, to prove that she didn't need him. But another part of her, the part she couldn't ignore, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he could still protect her, that the man she once loved hadn't completely disappeared. But she couldn't let herself go there. Not yet. Not when everything had already been broken. "I'm not your responsibility anymore," Alyssa said, her voice shaking, but her eyes blazing with defiance. "And you're not my savior." Zane's expression softened, his hand loosening around her wrist, though his gaze never wavered. "I never said I was. But you're mine to protect, Alyssa. I won't let them take you." She wanted to say something, anything to push him away, to convince herself that she was better off without him. But as the pack closed in, she knew there was no time for that. The past was done. But the present, the fight that was coming, the danger they were about to face, was all that mattered now. And in that moment, Alyssa realized something. Despite all the pain, despite the years of separation, Zane wasn't just the alpha who had broken her heart. He was the alpha who might be the only one who could save her now. The air between Alyssa and Zane grew thicker, suffocating almost as the sounds of the pack's growls grew more distant. But the weight in Alyssa's chest didn't lift. No, if anything, it grew heavier, pressing against her ribs, constricting her lungs. There was a familiar weight to it, the weight of being hunted, the weight of being unwanted. It was a weight she had carried for so long, a burden she had never been able to put down. She could feel it again now, this time with Zane standing beside her, a man who once shared her heart, but had turned his back on her in the cruelest way possible. Alyssa closed her eyes, taking in a shaky breath. She didn't want to feel this way, but she couldn't help it. She didn't want to remember. She didn't want to go back to the past, to the place where her own pack had cast her out, where they had labeled her a threat, a danger to everything they stood for. But it was all so clear, so sharp in her mind that the memories broke through, flooding her consciousness. Her mind drifted back to that night, the night she was cast out, the night she had been forced to run, to hide, to let her power consume her in ways she couldn't understand. Flashback. The moon hung high in the sky, full and brilliant, casting a silver glow over the clearing where the pack had gathered. She had been there once, standing proudly beside them, her family, her people. She had thought they were her future, her forever. They had been her everything. But now, as the alpha stood before her, his eyes hard with decision, everything she had ever believed in began to unravel. "You're a danger, Alyssa," the alpha had said, his voice like gravel, cold and final. "Your power is too strong, too unstable. We can't control you anymore." Her breath had caught in her throat, her heart twisting in her chest. She had tried to plead with him, tried to explain that she hadn't meant for it to happen, that she didn't know how to control it. But it was too late. They had already made their decision. Her own pack. The people she had grown up with had turned their backs on her. They had cast her out. You will leave, now, before your power destroys us all. She had begged, had fought, but they wouldn't listen. They couldn't listen. She was a threat, a monster, a danger. That's what they had called her, a threat to their pack, to their future. And so, with nothing but the clothes on her back, Alyssa had been forced into the wild, cast into the night like an unwanted stray, with no place to go, no one to turn to. She had run, not knowing where, not knowing how far, but just running. The fear had driven her. That fear of being rejected, of being alone. And with that fear came the power, the forbidden power that she had tried to hide, to keep locked away. But it had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to break free, ready to destroy. Present. Alyssa's fingers curled into fists at her sides as the memory hit her, the sting of rejection still fresh, even after all these years. She'd spent so long in the darkness, alone, hiding from the world, from the people who had once been her family. She had tried to bury that part of herself, to pretend that it wasn't there, but it was, and it always would be. Her eyes fluttered open, and she glanced at Zane, standing just a few feet away, his gaze fixed on the distant trees, his expression unreadable. How could she still want him? How could she still feel this pull, this ache in her chest when he had left her behind, when he had cast her aside without a second thought? She wanted to hate him. She wanted to scream at him, tell him that he had no right to be here, no right to speak to her after everything. But the truth was, despite the pain, despite the years of bitterness and anger, she couldn't. She couldn't hate him. Not when he was the one person who had ever truly understood her. Not when he was the one person who had ever seen her, really seen her. Not the monster, not the danger, but the woman she was beneath all of it. I didn't want to leave you. Zane's voice cut through the silence, raw and heavy with the weight of years. She could hear the pain in his words, the regret. He wasn't the same man she had known before. He wasn't the alpha who had cast her aside. He had changed. He was no longer that man, and yet she didn't know if she could trust him again. You didn't have a choice, Alyssa said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. It was the truth. Zane turned his head to look at her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place. I didn't, but I should have fought for you. I should have fought for us. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Should have fought for them? For them? Could it be that simple? Could the man who had turned his back on her all those years ago really be here now, speaking words like that? Why are you here, Zane? Alyssa asked, her voice cracking with the weight of her emotions. She was afraid to know the answer, afraid that he would disappoint her again. He took a step closer, his presence drawing her in like a magnet. Because I was wrong, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I wasn't. I was just afraid. Alyssa shook her head, the anger rising inside her again, this time sharper, more bitter. Afraid? Of me? Of my power? Of losing you, Zane replied, his voice almost breaking. Of seeing the woman I loved slip away from me, consumed by something I couldn't control. I thought if I let you go, you would be safer. I thought I was protecting you. Alyssa stared at him, her mind racing. The hurt was still there, deep in her chest, but it was being swallowed by something else now, something unfamiliar, something she didn't know how to handle. Hope. It was hope, so fragile, so delicate. And she wasn't sure she could allow herself to feel it again. I didn't want your protection, she said, her voice steadier now, though it still wavered slightly with emotion. "I didn't need it." "Then why did you stay?" Zane asked, his voice tinged with confusion and pain. "Why did you let me go? Why didn't you fight for us?" Alyssa's chest tightened at the question. She couldn't answer that. She had tried to move on. She had tried to bury the feelings, to convince herself that Zane was just a part of her past. But the truth was, she had never stopped caring for him. She had never stopped loving him, even when he had broken her heart. "Because I was afraid," she admitted softly, her voice barely audible, "afraid of what I might become, afraid of what my power might do. I didn't want to hurt anyone, least of all you, so I ran. I ran as far as I could, and I never looked back." Zane's face softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no distance between them, no barriers, no walls, just two people standing in the midst of the storm, their hearts laid bare, raw and vulnerable. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice full of regret. "I never should have let you go, and I won't make that mistake again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, heavy with everything they had lost. Alyssa didn't know what to say. She didn't know if she could forgive him, if she could ever trust him again. But as she looked into his eyes, into the depth of his sorrow, something stirred inside her, something that had been buried for so long, a small flicker of hope. She didn't know what would happen between them, didn't know if the scars of the past could ever fully heal. But for the first time in years, Alyssa allowed herself to believe, even if just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. But the danger was still there. It wasn't gone, and Alyssa couldn't forget that. Not when there was so much more at stake, not when the pack was still hunting her, still coming for her. And yet, despite everything, despite the walls that had been built, despite the fear, Alyssa took a small step forward, her hand reaching for Zane's. And when their fingers brushed, it felt like the beginning of something new, something that neither of them could ignore, something worth fighting for. The trees seemed to close in around them, the shadows deepening as they walked. The air had shifted, the oppressive weight of the forest thick with ancient energy, a feeling that crawled up Alyssa's spine like a whisper, too soft to be real, but too strong to ignore. Zane's presence beside her felt more like an anchor than a companion. His steady gaze constantly sweeping the surroundings as if he, too, could feel the shift in the air. The deeper they ventured into the heart of the forest, the more the world seemed to change, bending and warping around them. The dense trees, thick with centuries of growth, stood like silent sentinels, their boughs arching above them as if in protection, or perhaps warning. The wind was still, almost unnaturally so, leaving only the distant sound of their footsteps on the forest floor to break the silence. It was strange, too quiet. Alyssa had spent so many years hiding in places like this, dark corners of the world where no one could find her. But this was different. There was a stillness to the forest now, like the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She glanced at Zane, his jaw set in determination, but his eyes were distant, as though he, too, was battling something within himself. She could feel it, too, the weight of the moment, the pull. It was like an invisible thread tugging at her chest, leading her forward even though every part of her wanted to resist. "Alyssa," Zane said, his voice breaking the silence as he glanced at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Do you feel it?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was answering him or simply acknowledging the truth in her own mind. "I feel something. It's like I'm being pulled, but I don't understand it. It's like the forest is guiding me, or maybe it's me guiding it." Her voice faltered, as if the admission itself felt dangerous, almost too real to say out loud. The path ahead of them opened up suddenly, revealing a clearing bathed in the soft light of the moon. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient shrine, weathered by time but still standing strong, its stone pillars twisted with ivy and roots that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the structure. It was like she had been here before, or maybe she had been waiting to be here. Zane's grip on her hand tightened slightly as they approached the shrine. His gaze flickered to the symbols etched into the stone, symbols that Alyssa had never seen before, but felt deep within her, as though they were etched into her very soul. There was something ancient about them, something familiar that gnawed at the edges of her memory. She could almost hear the whispers of forgotten voices in the wind, murmuring in a language she couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear. This place was sacred, and it was waiting for her. "You're not alone here," Zane murmured, his voice tense with awe. "This place, it's been waiting for you." Alyssa swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in like a stone in her chest. "I don't understand," she whispered, the fear in her voice unmistakable. "What is all this? Why now?" Zane turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a rawness that took her breath away. "You've always been more than you realized, Alyssa. You've always had more power than you've let yourself believe." Before she could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows of the grove. Tall and slender, draped in a cloak of deep green and gold, the figure moved like a shadow among the trees, stepping into the moonlight with a presence that seemed to belong to another time. A woman, her face obscured by the hood of her cloak, yet her eyes glowed with a strange, almost ethereal light. Alyssa stepped back instinctively, her heart racing, but Zane didn't move. He stayed rooted beside her, as if he had been expecting this. The woman didn't speak immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying them with an intensity that made Alyssa feel as though she were being weighed, measured by some ancient force beyond her understanding. "You've come." The woman's voice was low, melodic, but it carried an ancient power within it. "I knew you would, child of the flame." Alyssa felt a jolt of recognition, though she didn't understand why. The words felt familiar in some way, as though they had been whispered to her in dreams she had long since forgotten. But the truth was she didn't understand them. She didn't understand any of this. "I'm not," Alyssa began to protest, her voice shaky, but the woman raised her hand, cutting her off gently. "Do not deny what you are," the woman said, her voice both comforting and commanding. "You are the one who has been marked. You are the child of the flame, the one the prophecy speaks of." Alyssa blinked, her pulse quickening. "Prophecy? What prophecy?" The woman smiled, though it wasn't a smile of warmth. It was more like the smile of someone who had seen far too much to be moved by the same things that would have once made others laugh. It was a knowing smile. "The prophecy that speaks of a power so great it could either save or destroy this world. The one who was marked with the flame, born of both light and darkness. The one who would decide the fate of all." Alyssa shook her head, feeling a deep unease settle in her stomach. I don't understand. I'm just a woman. I'm nothing like that." "Do not doubt yourself, Alyssa," the woman said softly, stepping forward until she stood just a few paces away. Her eyes glowed brighter now, pulsing with a soft golden hue. "The mark is not just a symbol on your skin, it is who you are. It is your destiny." Alyssa's heart thudded painfully in her chest. Her fingers trembled at her sides, and for a moment she felt as though the ground beneath her would give way. She'd always known that something about her was different, something about her power, about the way it coursed through her, unbidden and untamed. But this was something else entirely. She was being told that she had a purpose, a destiny, that her very existence was tied to something bigger than herself. And yet, she didn't know if she could carry that weight. "What does this mean for me?" Alyssa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Though the fear in it was undeniable, the woman's gaze softened, though the power in her eyes remained. "It means you must choose, Alyssa. You must choose whether you will accept your place in the world, whether you will embrace the power that is yours to wield, or whether you will turn away, live in the shadows of the life you have known, hiding from the truth. But know this, your choice will change everything. It will change the world." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with an ancient weight that threatened to crush her. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear back into the woods and pretend none of this was real. But deep down, in the quiet places of her heart, where she kept her deepest fears and desires, she knew this was no illusion. This was real. Her power, her mark, it had always been real. And now, she had to decide whether to embrace it or let it destroy her. "You don't have to do this alone." Zane's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. He stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, grounding her. His touch was warm, familiar, and it offered her a fleeting sense of peace, even in the midst of the chaos. "I'm here. I'll stand with you, no matter what you choose." Alyssa's heart clenched in her chest as she turned to look at him. The weight of his words, of his promise, hit her like a tidal wave. She had been alone for so long, hiding from the world and from herself. But now, in this moment, with Zane standing beside her and the prophecy unfolding before her, she realized that she couldn't do it alone. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape her destiny. But that didn't mean she had to face it by herself. With a deep breath, Alyssa squared her shoulders, a sense of determination blooming in her chest. "I don't know what comes next," she said, her voice steady now, though her heart still pounded in her chest. "But I'm ready to face it." The woman smiled then, a knowing, ancient smile. "The flames have already been lit, Alyssa. Now all that remains is for you to decide how you will burn." And with that, the world around her seemed to shift, the air humming with energy as the symbols carved into the shrine began to glow with a brilliant, ethereal light. Alyssa stepped forward, Zane's hand still on her shoulder, and together they stepped into the unknown, the weight of destiny pressing down on them both. And in that moment, Alyssa realized that no matter how much she feared the power within her, no matter how much she feared the truth of her destiny, she wasn't running anymore. She was ready to fight, ready to claim the power that had always been hers, ready to become who she was meant to be. The moon hung low in the sky, a heavy, swollen orb casting long shadows over the clearing. The air was thick with tension, the echoes of ancient power still reverberating through the trees, vibrating in Alyssa's bones. The shrine stood behind them, its glow fading as the symbols etched into its stones dimmed, their meaning not lost but merely waiting for something or someone. The forest felt alive as if holding its breath, waiting for what came next. Alyssa stood with Zane at her side, her hand still resting on his. She could feel the heat of him through the fabric of her clothes, the steadiness of his presence anchoring her. He had been a part of her past, her deepest love and her greatest heartbreak. And yet, here they were, standing together again in the face of something neither of them could understand. Zane's touch was like a promise, grounding her in the moment, but Alyssa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was coming, and it wasn't just the quiet hum of destiny that seemed to vibrate through the trees. No, there was a different kind of tension in the air now, something darker, more ominous. The calm that had settled over the clearing was fragile, a mere illusion before the storm. "I don't know how long we have," Zane murmured, his voice low, his eyes scanning the trees. His hand still held hers, But there was a restlessness in him now, a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. There's something out there. I can feel it. Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Before Zane could answer, the first growl pierced the stillness of the night. It was low at first, distant, almost muffled by the trees. But it didn't take long for it to grow louder, sharper, until it was an unmistakable warning, a call from the shadows. Alyssa's grip on Zane's hand tightened, a chill running down her spine as the growls turned into snarls, a chorus of beastly voices echoing through the woods. Something was coming, something big, and it wasn't friendly. "Stay behind me," Zane ordered, his voice suddenly hard, commanding. His body went taut, the muscles in his shoulders rippling with tension as his eyes flickered to the trees surrounding them. Alyssa could see the change in him, the shift from man to alpha, the weight of his responsibilities settling on his shoulders like an iron shackle. "What's happening?" Alyssa asked, her voice barely a whisper as fear gnawed at her insides. "I don't know," Zane muttered. "But I know who's coming." Before she could ask again, the sound of rapid movement broke the silence. Figures darted between the trees, their shapes dark and shifting, moving with the grace of hunters. Alyssa's heart slammed in her chest as she realized that they were surrounded. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, tall and broad, a malevolent presence radiating from him like a storm cloud ready to break. His eyes gleamed in the moonlight, amber and sharp, like a predator's. He was an alpha, that much was clear. And he was staring directly at Zane with an intensity that sent a shiver down Alyssa's spine. Zane's hand instinctively moved to Alyssa's back, guiding her behind him, shielding her from the stranger's gaze. "Dorian." Zane's voice was low, steady, but underneath it there was something else, something that hinted at old scars, old wounds. The name hung in the air like a dark omen, thick with unspoken history. The alpha, Dorian, took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Zane. "You've been keeping secrets, Zane," Dorian said, his voice deep, rich with authority, as if every word carried the weight of 1,000 decisions. "And I've come to collect." Zane's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing as he faced the rival alpha. "This isn't your business, Dorian." "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Dorian's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I want what's mine. And I want her." He pointed directly at Alyssa, his gaze turning cold as he locked eyes with her. "She's the one with the mark, isn't she? The child of the flame." Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. She didn't understand the significance of the mark, didn't fully grasp the prophecy that had been revealed to her, but hearing it out loud, hearing someone claim it like that, like she was a prize to be won, set her teeth on edge. It was as though she were being reduced to nothing more than a tool in someone else's game. Zane stepped forward, his body rigid, his expression hardening into something darker, more dangerous. "You don't get to take her, Dorian. Not now. Not ever." The air between them crackled with tension, the forest itself holding its breath. The growls from the other figures in the trees grew louder, more menacing. They were closing in, tightening their circle around them. Alyssa could feel the weight of it, the pressure, the overwhelming sense of danger. The pack wasn't just here to fight Zane. They were here to take everything, and Alyssa was the prize. Dorian's eyes flickered toward her, a dark gleam in them. "You think you can protect her?" Dorian asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's nothing but a liability, a threat to all of us. She's a danger to you, Zane. You don't see it, but I do." Alyssa's stomach twisted with the accusation. She didn't know if she was a danger or not. She didn't know what the mark meant, what the prophecy really was. But she did know one thing. She wasn't going to let anyone use her like this. Not again. "I don't need protecting." Alyssa's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension that hung thick in the air. "I'm not your weapon. I'm not your prize." Dorian's eyes snapped to her, his expression darkening. "You don't get to choose that. It was chosen for you, just like the rest of us." Zane's eyes softened briefly, his gaze flickering to Alyssa, but the moment was fleeting. There was no time for softness, no time for hesitation. The wolves around them began to move, their eyes glowing in the dark, their growls rising into a chorus of aggression. Alyssa could feel the air shifting around them, the atmosphere electric with the impending clash. "I won't let you have her," Zane growled, stepping forward, his body rigid with the authority of his position. "She's not yours to take." Dorian's lips curled into a cruel smile, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the first wolf lunged, a massive creature with fur as dark as midnight, teeth bared, claws extended. The clash was immediate, violent and brutal. Zane's movements were lightning fast, a blur of strength and power. He fought with the ferocity of an alpha, his body twisting and turning as he fought off the attackers. Alyssa stumbled back, her heart racing, her body frozen in the midst of the chaos. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to face them, but she couldn't stay hidden forever. She stepped forward, feeling the heat of her power rise within her, the silver flame roaring to life inside her chest. Fighting to break free, but she held it back. She didn't know what it could do, didn't know if she could control it. "You don't have to do this," Zane grunted, his voice tight with exertion as he fought off Dorian's pack. "Just walk away, Dorian. Walk away and let her go." Dorian laughed, the sound deep and unsettling. "You can't protect her forever, Zane. You'll have to choose, your pack or her." The words hit Alyssa like a punch to the gut. She saw the conflict in Zane's eyes, saw the flicker of uncertainty that passed across his face, and in that moment, her heart broke. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for him, too. But could he choose her? Could he choose her over everything he had ever known, over his pack, over his duty as alpha? The wolves continued to fight, their howls and snarls filling the air, but all Alyssa could focus on now was Zane, the alpha who had walked away, the alpha who might have to choose between her and everything else he had ever known. And in that moment, Alyssa knew that whatever happened next, whatever choices they made, it would change everything. The world outside the cave had fallen into a heavy silence. The sounds of the battle between Zane's pack and Dorian's wolves fading into the distance. The chaos of moments before had been replaced with an eerie stillness, a quiet that seemed unnatural in its calmness. Inside, the dim flicker of a small fire cast long shadows across the rocky walls, the flames dancing and crackling softly, their light flickering across Zane's face as he stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. Alyssa sat across from him, her back against the cold stone, her knees pulled up to her chest. She didn't know how long they had been sitting like this in the aftermath of the fight, but time had no meaning in this place. The weight of the events that had unfolded weighed heavily on her, the confusion and the fear still gnawing at her. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she could hear the rhythm of her own breath, could feel her heart beating steadily in her chest. Zane's presence was an anchor. It both comforted her and threatened to undo everything she had worked so hard to build. She had never expected this, never expected him to return. Never expected to feel this much, this intensely after everything that had happened between them. He had been her world once, the center of everything she had known. And now, here he was again, sitting in front of her, so close she could feel the heat of his body in the air between them. But the silence stretched on, heavy with words neither of them was saying. Zane shifted, breaking the quiet as he ran a hand through his hair, his eyes flicking to hers, then quickly away again. She saw the tightness in his jaw, the subtle clench of his fists as he struggled to find the right words. For a moment, the old familiarity between them seemed to vanish, replaced by an uncomfortable distance, a barrier neither of them knew how to break. Finally, Zane spoke, his voice softer than it had been before, as if the weight of everything was pressing on him, too. "You know," he began, his voice rough, "when I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought I was protecting you. Thought I could keep you safe from all of this." He gestured to the cave, to the dark forest outside, to the pack that seemed to shadow them at every turn. "But I was wrong. I couldn't protect you. I couldn't protect myself. I thought I could stay in control, stay in charge, but—" His words faltered, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Alyssa saw the cracks in his armor, the vulnerable human side of him she had once known so well, the side he had hidden from her. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze searching his face, trying to understand him in a way she never had before. "But what?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. She needed him to say the words he had been holding back for so long. Zane swallowed, looking down at his hands as if he were searching for something in them, an answer, a reason, maybe even the courage to say what had been buried beneath all those years of silence. When he looked up at her again, his eyes were raw, exposed. "I thought I could be the alpha," he said, his voice steadying with the weight of the truth. "Thought I could be strong enough for everyone, for the pack, for me. But I wasn't. I wasn't strong enough to protect you, to keep us safe. I was just afraid of losing control." Alyssa's heart twisted in her chest as she listened to him, her own emotions swirling in the darkened space between them. He was opening up to her in a way he never had before. She had always seen him as the unshakable alpha, the one who had it all together, who made the hard decisions, who led without hesitation. But this vulnerability was something she hadn't expected. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. The words felt like they might break the fragile trust that had begun to form between them, the walls they had both been building up for years, slowly crumbling. She knew the weight of his past. She had carried it with him, even after he had left. But hearing him say it, hearing him admit it out loud, shifted something in her, something deep inside her that she had buried for far too long. "I thought I was the one who lost control," Alyssa said quietly, her voice shaky, her eyes meeting his. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "I thought it was just me, but now I see that you were afraid too." Zane's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment the walls between them seemed to dissolve entirely. The fire crackled in the silence as the truth hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. Alyssa's throat tightened, her chest aching with the weight of everything they had been through, everything they still carried. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Zane," she said, her voice breaking, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Not of me, not of us." Zane's eyes flickered with something raw, something vulnerable. "I know, but it's not just about us anymore, is it? It's about everything. About the pack, about the world we've both been trying to control. I don't know how to fix it. Don't know if we even can." Alyssa wiped the tear away quickly, as if the vulnerability she felt in this moment were too much to bear. But it wasn't weakness. It was a connection, a bridge, slowly being built between them, one piece at a time. "We don't have to fix it all right now," she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest as she finally allowed herself to lean in just a little closer to him, feeling the heat of his body against hers. "But maybe we can start by trusting each other again." Zane's breath hitched at her words, and for a moment Alyssa thought he might pull away, but he didn't. Instead, he reached out slowly, his hand brushing against hers, fingers trembling slightly as he brushed the back of her hand with his. It was a gentle, almost tentative touch, but it spoke volumes. "I see you," Zane said softly, his voice like a prayer, an admission, a promise. "All of you. Not just the power, not just the woman you think you are, but the woman you really are. I see the fire inside you. I see the strength you carry, and He stopped himself, swallowing thickly. "I'm not afraid of you, Alyssa. Not anymore. I'm not afraid of what you've become. I'm not afraid of what I see in you." Her breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words, the truth in them, settled over her like a blanket. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't afraid of the power she carried inside her. And maybe, for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of herself either. The moment hung in the air, thick with the unspoken, with the raw honesty between them. The fire crackled. The only sound in the world as Zane and Alyssa stared at each other, their faces inches apart, the connection between them undeniable. Their breaths mingled in the cool air, each one too short, too shallow to contain the desire that was building between them, the longing that had been buried for so long. For a moment, Alyssa thought he might kiss her, thought that this fragile thread between them would snap, pulling them together in an instant, a release of everything they had kept locked away. But Zane hesitated, just a breath too long. And that hesitation, that moment of doubt, was all it took. He pulled back slightly, his gaze still intense, but now full of something else, something more than just longing, something deep, something raw. "We can't," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of the decision. "Not yet." Alyssa closed her eyes, feeling the heat of him lingering on her skin. She didn't want to pull away, didn't want this moment to end, but part of her knew he was right. They weren't ready. Not yet. But the tension between them was undeniable. The connection was real, and as the night stretched on, the world outside, quiet. Alyssa couldn't help but feel the promise of something new beginning between them, something neither of them could stop, no matter how hard they tried. The night had shifted, and the quiet stillness that had settled over the forest was now a distant memory. The tension that had once felt like a fragile thread between Alyssa and Zane had slowly unraveled into something deeper, darker. The space between them was no longer filled with uncertain longing, but with a kind of quiet intimacy that felt almost sacred. But it was all about to come crashing down. Alyssa could feel it in the air, the energy humming, building with every passing second. It was a weight she couldn't shake, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for her. She sat with Zane in the clearing, her heart still raw from their quiet moment by the fire. His presence next to her felt like both solace and danger, a duality that she could no longer deny. But she hadn't realized just how fragile that peace had been, how easily everything they had built could be shattered. The sudden crackle of branches behind them broke the silence. Alyssa turned sharply, her senses alert. Her breath hitched as figures emerged from the shadows of the trees. Not wolves this time. People. Not just any people, but figures she recognized all too well. Members of the pack. Her pack. The ones who had exiled her years ago, who had turned their backs on her. Yet here they were now, moving toward them with grim determination. Zane stood abruptly, his body taut, muscles rippling with the instinct to protect. "Stay back," he said quietly, his voice a low growl. He reached for Alyssa's hand, pulling her behind him, but his grip was tight, almost desperate. He felt the shift in the air, too. Something wasn't right. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes hard and unyielding. It was Marcus, the beta of Zane's pack, the man who had always been Zane's closest ally. But now, as Marcus stood before them, his gaze was filled with something entirely different. There was no warmth in his eyes, no understanding. There was only cold, calculated disdain. Zane's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching as he faced his old friend. "What is this, Marcus?" he asked, his voice tight with the weight of years of history, of trust that had been tested and broken. "What do you want?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at Alyssa, his eyes flicking over her, the same distaste visible in the lines of his face. Then, with a heavy sigh, he spoke, his voice echoing through the clearing like a death sentence. "Alyssa, the child of the flame," Marcus said, his words deliberately slow, as though savoring the moment. "You think you can hide from what you are, but we see you. We know what you are now." Alyssa's blood turned cold at his words. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the unspoken judgment in his eyes. It wasn't just about what she was anymore. It was about what she had done. She could see the hate in their faces, the way they feared her power. She had never wanted this, never wanted to be the weapon they saw her as. But the truth was, she was, and they couldn't unsee it. The council's members, standing just behind Marcus, shifted uneasily. Alyssa could see the fear in their eyes, barely hidden behind their expressions of controlled disdain. They were afraid of her. She could feel the weight of it, the crushing realization that her very existence was now a threat to them. Her chest tightened, the breath leaving her in ragged gasps. She had tried to hide, tried to keep her power in check, but it had never been enough. The mark, the flame within her, it had always been there, burning bright, waiting for the moment to consume her, to consume everyone. Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts again. "You've come back to us, Zane," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But she is a liability, a danger to us all. She has no place here. She never did." Zane's posture stiffened, his eyes flashing with anger. "She has every right to be here," he snapped, his voice rising. "I told you, Marcus. She's with me. I'll protect her, no matter what you think." Alyssa stepped forward then, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always known this moment would come, this moment where she would be forced to face her fate, to confront the fear that had followed her all her life. But now, standing in front of Zane, with the weight of the pack's hatred on her shoulders, she couldn't hold it back any longer. "I don't need your protection, Zane," she said, her voice sharp with the force of everything she had buried. "I don't need anyone to protect me. I'm not a weapon to be hidden away. I'm not some curse to be feared." Her words hung in the air between them like a challenge, and in the tense silence that followed, her power surged inside her, a force she could barely contain. The fire inside her, the flame that had always been so dangerous, now threatened to break free. She could feel it, hot and insistent, clawing at her control. Her fists clenched at her sides, the heat of it radiating through her body. "I'm not what you think I am," Alyssa continued, her voice rising, trembling with emotion. "I never was." Marcus laughed, a cruel, bitter sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You're more than you know, Alyssa," he said, his voice low and mocking. "And that's what scares us. The power you carry, it's dangerous. You're a danger to all of us, and you always will be." Zane's gaze flickered to her, his expression torn, but the words had already been said. The betrayal was out in the open now. The mask had dropped, and Alyssa was left standing in the wreckage of everything she had once hoped to rebuild. Alyssa's heart shattered in that moment. She could feel the sting of it, the bitter realization that the people she had once called family would never accept her. She was nothing more than a threat, a monster. And then, without warning, the flame inside her erupted. Her body jerked forward as if yanked by an invisible force, and the world around her seemed to blur. The fire, the silver flame, burst out of her, roaring with the force of a storm. It was no longer something she could control, no longer something she could hide. The power surged through her, hot and wild, a white-hot wave of raw energy that enveloped the clearing. The ground beneath her feet cracked and shifted, as if the earth itself was trembling with the force of her release. Zane shouted her name, but the sound was drowned out by the deafening roar of her power, the fire burning bright in her chest. She felt it felt the strength of it coursing through her, felt her skin burn with the intensity of the flames. She had never felt this before, this power, this wildness. It was a force of nature, and it was hers to wield. But as the power raged inside her, so too did the fear of what she had become, what she was capable of, the fear of losing control. And for a brief, horrible moment, she thought she might destroy everything, everyone. But Zane was there. She felt his hand on hers, pulling her back, holding her steady. "Alyssa," he said, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Please, don't do this." Alyssa's breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to control the fire inside her. It was a battle, her emotions warring with the power that raged in her veins. She was losing. She was going to lose it all. And then, as if hearing his voice was enough, the flames began to subside. The world slowed around her, the fire receding back into her chest, though the heat still burned in her blood. She stood there, trembling, her hands still glowing with a dim, faint light. But the storm within her was quiet now. Zane's eyes were filled with something. Fear? Understanding? A mixture of both. But his voice, when he spoke again, was soft. "You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry this by yourself, Alyssa. I'm here, I'll help you." But the world had already shifted. The betrayal was done. And the path forward was no longer simple. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as the weight of it all crashed down on her. She had changed. She had unleashed something within herself that she could never take back. And no matter how much Zane stood by her now, she couldn't erase the damage that had already been done. The pack had rejected her. Her power had broken free. And now, nothing would ever be the same again. The night had fractured. The forest now a war zone. The once calm clearing was filled with a chaotic energy, a violent clash between two worlds. Alyssa could feel the vibration of it in her very bones. The winds had shifted, and with them came an overwhelming sense of urgency. A heat that radiated from her core, pulsing in time with the frantic beat of her heart. She could hear the growls of wolves, their guttural sounds filling the air like an impending storm. And in the distance, Zane's pack, the very pack that had once been her family, was now under siege. The enemy had come, not just for Alyssa, but for everything she held dear. They threatened her family, her loved ones, Zane, and the very existence she had fought so hard to protect. She could feel it, like a tightening noose, pulling her in, suffocating her. It was no longer about her survival. It was about something far greater. It was about the survival of the ones she loved, the world that had cast her out, and the power inside her that she had spent her entire life trying to keep locked away. But no more would she hide. No more would she allow her power to be a curse or a secret to be kept in the shadows. The time for restraint had ended. The time for standing on the sidelines, afraid of what she could become, was over. Zane's voice broke through the chaos, his words sharp, commanding. "Alyssa, please don't do this. Don't let them win." But Alyssa was already moving, already feeling the fire inside her stir with an intensity that left her breathless. The flames that had once been contained, locked within her a dangerous secret, now surged to the surface. They burned bright, alive, wild, untamed. And with that flame, the world around her began to shift. The trees trembled, their leaves rustling like whispers, as if the very earth was reacting to her power. The air grew thick, charged with energy, as if the sky itself could no longer stand aside and watch. Alyssa's hands began to glow, the silver flame spilling from her fingers, spreading across her skin like molten liquid. The marks on her body, symbols ancient and powerful, came to life, glowing with a brilliance that made her feel as though she were the very pulse of the world. And in that moment, Alyssa understood. She was not just a woman. She was not just a weapon. She was a force, a being of both fire and light, born to wield the very power that had been feared for centuries. She wasn't just the child of the flame. She was the one who would decide whether that flame would burn the world to the ground or lift it to something greater. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she embraced the power inside her. The silver flame burned bright, and as it did, ancient symbols carved into her skin flared to life, their glow spreading like wildfire. The ground beneath her feet seemed to respond to her, the earth cracking and shifting as if recognizing her awakening. The very trees around her groaned in protest, the sky darkening with the weight of the storm that had been waiting for this moment. Her gaze turned toward the enemy, the figures advancing toward her with malicious intent, their eyes glowing with hatred, their claws bared in a deadly charge. But she was no longer afraid. Alyssa's power surged, and with it, a deep guttural roar that echoed through the clearing. The flames around her grew higher, burning with the force of 1,000 suns, and she moved, swift, unstoppable, her body a blur of light and fire, each step sending tremors through the earth. The first of the enemies lunged at her, a monstrous figure, its teeth bared, ready to tear her apart. But Alyssa was faster. She twisted, her body moving with an unnatural grace, and in a single fluid motion, she raised her hands. The flames shot forward, a jet of silver fire, and the beast screamed as it was consumed by the inferno. The heat was so intense. It could have scorched the air itself, but Alyssa didn't flinch. She was no longer just her. She was the flame. The enemy scattered, their numbers shrinking as the fire she wielded consumed them one by one. The ground trembled, the sky cracked open with a flash of blinding light, and Alyssa stood at the center of it all, undeterred, unbroken, empowered. The real enemy, the one who had been pulling the strings, the one who had orchestrated this attack, finally emerged from the shadows. A tall, imposing figure cloaked in dark robes, his face hidden in the deep folds of his hood. But Alyssa could feel his power, even before he spoke. It was a dark, cold energy, a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around him. He was a master of darkness, and his eyes, when they met hers, glowed with the same cold fire that had consumed so many before her. "You think you can stop me?" His voice echoed, smooth and cold, like a blade being sharpened. "You think you can wield that power without consequence?" Alyssa met his gaze, her heart steady, her pulse even. "I'm done being your sacrifice," she said, her voice filled with the fury of everything she had lost. "You think I'm the one who's dangerous? You think I'm the one who can't be controlled?" Her hands glowed brighter, the silver flames intensifying as she took a step toward him, the power inside her churning, alive. "No, I am not your weapon. I am not your puppet. I am the one who will decide what happens next." The man's lips twisted into a grin, but it was empty, bitter, like something long forgotten and left to rot in the dark. "You're still too weak, Alyssa. You'll never be able to control it. You'll burn yourself alive before you ever learn to control your destiny." Alyssa's anger flared, hot and unstoppable. She took another step forward, her body filled with a power she could no longer deny. She wasn't weak, not anymore. With a primal cry, she raised her hands, and the fire exploded from her, engulfing everything in its path. The flames were a living, breathing entity, twisting and writhing like serpents in the air. The ground beneath her cracked open, the earth itself reacting to the intensity of the energy she wielded. The sky above swirled with dark clouds, crackling with lightning, as if nature itself had aligned with her will. The enemy recoiled, his face twisting in pain as the fire licked at him, but he didn't run. He fought back, raising his arms to summon a shield of dark energy, but it was no match for the silver flames that Alyssa now controlled. Her power wasn't just fire, it was life itself. It was destruction and creation, and it was hers to command. "This ends now," she growled, her voice filled with the fury of everything she had buried. With one final, deafening roar, the fire surged forward, consuming the dark figure in its blaze. His scream was swallowed by the inferno, his form disintegrating into ash as the flames burned hotter, brighter, until the very air around them shimmered with the intensity of it. Alyssa stood amidst the ruins, her chest heaving with the exertion of the battle, her hands still crackling with the last remnants of the fire. The world around her seemed to settle. The once stormy sky clearing, the moonlight spilling back into the clearing as though nothing had happened at all. But she knew everything had changed. Her power had been claimed, not as a curse, not as something to be hidden or feared, but as part of who she was. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. Zane stepped forward, his eyes wide as he approached her, his voice rough with awe. "Alyssa, you did it. You really did it." Alyssa's heart thundered in her chest, her body still humming with the residual power that surged through her. "I didn't just do it," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am it." Zane reached for her, his hand trembling as he cupped her cheek, his touch gentle but filled with something more, something that she couldn't name. His eyes searched hers, filled with something between awe and fear. "You've become everything I feared," he said quietly, his voice hoarse, "and everything I needed." Alyssa's gaze softened, her breath still catching in her throat as she looked at him. "And everything we need," she whispered back, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. In that moment, everything fell into place. They had faced the darkness together, and together they would face whatever came next. The aftermath of battle was a quiet that almost felt unreal. The air, still charged with the echoes of Alyssa's power, hung heavy, almost suffocating. The clearing, once a place of safety, now felt like a forgotten battleground, the ground beneath her feet scorched. The air thick with the scent of ash and smoke. The remnants of the enemy, burnt and broken, were scattered around her, a grim reminder of the power she had wielded and the price of her choice. She stood in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling in the silence, the heat of her silver flame still licking at her skin. She could feel it pulsing within her, this power, this force that had once been a secret, now fully realized. But it was not a victory she could feel proud of. The destruction she had caused, the lives she had taken, the chaos she had unleashed, it wasn't something that could be so easily swept away. Zane stood beside her, his eyes still wide with the awe of what they had just witnessed, his breath catching in the air. But there was something in his gaze now, something more than just admiration, something uncertain. The bond between them had shifted again, had deepened, but in a way that felt like both an awakening and a loss. Alyssa turned her gaze toward him, feeling the weight of his silence settle between them like a wall. His eyes searched hers, and she could see the conflict in them, swirling like a storm. He had fought for her. He had chosen her in a way when he stood beside her against the enemy. But now that the dust had settled, the battle was over, and the world around them had shifted. Could he still choose her? Could they stand together in this new world, in this new reality where she wasn't just the woman he once knew, but something far greater, far more dangerous? The question hung in the air like a curse. "Zane," she whispered, her voice trembling with the rawness of everything she had just experienced, "can you still stand with me? Now that you've seen what I am, what I could become?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his gaze still locked on hers. Searching for something she couldn't quite place, she felt the pull of it, his hesitation, the unspoken fear, and it was like a cold hand pressing against her chest. This was the moment that would decide everything. The world had already asked its question. Will you choose her side? Would he? Could he? Alyssa could feel the heat of her power inside her, still alive, still pulsing with the possibility of destruction. But it was more than that. It was a call, a summons to something greater, something darker. And she could feel the gravity of that call, pulling at her heart, at her mind. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for balance, to control the power that threatened to overtake her, to protect the world she had once been a part of, even if it no longer had a place for her. Her heart pounded as she waited for Zane's response, the silence between them stretching too long, too heavy. Could she blame him for hesitating? Could she fault him for questioning whether the woman he had once loved, the woman he had let go, was now a threat to everything they had known? But the silence was broken by the call of the night, a low, distant howl from the depths of the forest. It was a reminder. The battle was not over. The enemy, the ones who feared her power, were not done yet. They would come for her again, and they would come for Zane, for the pack. They would come for everything they held dear. And in that moment, the choice became clear. Alyssa stood straighter, the weight of her power settling inside her like a burning flame, but now tempered by something else, something far deeper, her resolve. The choice was hers, and in that choice she found the strength to stand against the storm that was coming. The storm that would either tear her apart or build her into something unstoppable. "Zane," she said, her voice steady now, a strength she hadn't known she possessed seeping into her words. "I'm not asking for your protection anymore. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking you to stand with me. Choose me." His eyes widened, the pain and the conflict still there. But there was something else now, something flickering in his gaze. "Alyssa, But she cut him off, her voice soft but unwavering. "Will you choose me? Or will you fear me?" The question hung between them, a raw, honest challenge, one that pierced through the layers of doubt and fear that had built up between them. The world around them had fallen silent once again, and in that silence, Alyssa could hear her heartbeat, slow and steady, as she waited for Zane to make his choice. Her mind raced, memories flashing in the depths of her mind, of love, of loss, of betrayal. Of all the times she had let her fear control her, of all the times she had let others dictate who she could be, who she was allowed to be, but not anymore. Zane's chest rose with a deep breath, and for a moment the weight of everything hung on his next words, the answer that would change everything. "Alyssa," he began, his voice hoarse, filled with the raw emotion of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. And then, with the weight of a decision that could shatter everything, he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "I see you. All of you." Alyssa's breath caught in her throat, her heart stumbling in her chest. The words, those simple words, were more than just an answer. They were a promise. "I see you," he repeated, his voice steady now, stronger. "And I choose you. I choose us." The air around them seemed to crackle, the world holding its breath as the realization swept through Alyssa's veins. Zane had made his choice. He had chosen her, and in that moment she realized something more. This power, this fire, it was not something she had to fear. It was part of who she was. And now, for the first time in her life, she was ready to claim it. The silver flame inside her flared, brighter than ever before, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just destruction. It was creation. It was life. And it was her. Alyssa took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Zane's, and in that moment she knew that no matter what came next, she was no longer alone. They were no longer just two people caught in the storm. They were a force, together, and they would face whatever came next, side by side. If this story lit something inside you, if the flames of Alyssa's journey, her strength, and her transformation set your heart racing. Subscribe to Kismet Publishing Collection, because here, we tell tales that burn. Don't let the fire go out. The air hung thick with the remnants of chaos, the ground beneath them still quivering from the ferocity of Alyssa's power. The silence was deafening now, broken only by the slow crackle of the dying embers of the fire she had unleashed. The forest had calmed, the once frenzied sounds of battle now replaced with the eerie stillness of a world recovering from the storm that had passed through it. But as the last vestiges of her flame flickered and died, something else lingered in the air, something heavy, something far from finished. Alyssa stood amidst the quiet, her chest still rising and falling with each sharp breath she took. The silver flame inside her was no longer a wild inferno. It was a smoldering ember, still hot and alive beneath the surface, waiting for the next spark to set it ablaze again. Her hands shook as the power within her faded, but the sensation was still there, burning, persistent, insistent. She turned toward Zane, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing between them. No doubt, no fear, no hesitation, just the two of them, standing together in the aftermath of everything that had happened, everything that they had fought for. His hand reached out, taking hers, and for a moment, she let herself lean into him, her body pressing against his, with the comfort of someone who had finally found their place in a world that had once cast them aside. But even in that moment, with the weight of everything they had just survived, Alyssa knew this was not the end, not yet. As Zane's grip tightened on her hand, the ground beneath them gave a sharp, unsettling tremor. The earth shook once, twice, like a warning. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, but enough to make them both stiffen, enough to make the hairs on the back of Alyssa's neck rise. "Do you feel that?" Zane asked, his voice low, filled with uncertainty. His gaze scanned the trees around them, his body tense, his senses on high alert. Alyssa nodded, a chill creeping down her spine. "I do," she whispered. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, the sense that the world around them was shifting again. But this time, it wasn't just the aftermath of the battle. It was something else, something deeper. And then, as though the very shadows had been waiting for the right moment, a voice, low, gravelly, filled with a cold, ancient power, rose from the darkness. It wasn't the voice of someone they could see. It wasn't even a voice that seemed to belong to a living being at all. It was something more, a whisper carried on the wind, a promise that hovered just beyond their grasp. "She is not the only one." Alyssa's heart skipped a beat, her breath caught in her throat. Zane stiffened beside her, his grip on her hand tightening, his body now rigid with tension. The voice was familiar in a way that twisted something deep inside her, like a forgotten memory that she couldn't quite reach. A threat, an omen. She didn't know whose voice it was, but she knew one thing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, and Alyssa's knees almost buckled beneath her as the air thickened with a strange, oppressive energy. It was as though the world itself had suddenly shifted on its axis, leaving her off balance, unsteady. She couldn't see anything through the dense trees, couldn't make sense of the shifting shadows around them, but she felt it. The looming threat that was now more real than ever. Zane's breath was quick, his chest rising and falling with the same rhythm of panic that churned inside her. "What was that?" he asked, his voice filled with an urgency that hadn't been there before. "Who was that?" Alyssa didn't have an answer. She didn't know. But the answer was clear in the pit of her stomach, in the gnawing feeling that had been growing within her ever since she'd first realized what she was, the prophecy, the power, everything that she had been running from. She had always known that she wasn't the only one like her, that her power was part of something far larger than just her. But this was different. This was a warning. She forced herself to breathe, to steady her pulse, even as the trembling of the earth beneath her feet grew more intense. She looked up at Zane, her eyes locking with his, searching for some sort of comfort, some kind of assurance. But even he was shaken, the realization settling over both of them like a thick fog. Zane. Alyssa's voice cracked with the weight of everything that had been unleashed in her, in them. There's more, isn't there? This isn't over. There's something else. Something worse. Zane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in a protective gesture, his chest pressing against hers as he held her tightly. "We'll face it," he said, his voice rough but steady, filled with that same unwavering resolve. Together, no matter what comes next. But the words didn't ease the fear that lingered in the pit of Alyssa's stomach, the dread that curled around her heart like a serpent. Something was coming, something bigger than them, than the battles they had already fought, and it wasn't going to stop until it had taken everything they had left. The shadows deepened, the wind picking up again as the voice echoed through the trees once more. "She is not the only one." Alyssa swallowed hard, her throat dry, her body still trembling as she turned her gaze toward the darkened path ahead. The enemy she had faced was nothing compared to what was coming, nothing compared to the force she could feel gathering on the horizon. The darkness that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike, was finally beginning to make itself known, and it was more powerful than anything she had ever imagined. Zane tightened his hold on her, but Alyssa knew. She knew. This was just the beginning. The moonlight above seemed to grow dimmer, as if the night itself was retreating, hiding from the danger that was drawing closer. And as the tremors of the earth continued beneath them, Alyssa's heart thundered in her chest. It wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Alyssa closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the coming storm. She didn't know who or what had spoken those chilling words, or what they truly meant. But one thing was certain. Whatever was coming, they would face it. Together. She wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. And in that moment, she realized something deeper. She wasn't just fighting for her survival anymore. She was fighting for everyone she loved, for everything she believed in. The world was changing, and she would not let it destroy them. Alyssa opened her eyes, her gaze piercing into the shadows. "I won't be anyone's sacrifice," she said, her voice filled with a fierce resolve. "Not now. Not ever." And with that, the winds howled once more, carrying with them the promise of what was to come. If this story has lit a fire in you, ignited something deep inside your soul, then you know the journey is far from over. Subscribe to Kismet Publishing Collection. Because here, we tell tales that burn, that live, that will stay with you long after the night has passed. The flame has only just begun. Stay with us. The real story is about to unfold.